Okay, so hello and welcome. I'm Stella, and we are the European Action Coalition for the Right to Housing and to the City, a network gathering many grassroots collectives and movements coming from all over Europe and struggling, fighting for the right to housing for all. We are very glad to co-host tonight this webinar with Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, who have commissioned a very important study on EU housing policies, the study that we'll be discussing tonight. We are also very happy to have with us Sophia Tones from representing Rosa Luxemburg Brussels, and also the others of the study who are our comrades from the EAC, Eniko, Vincze, and Eva Batavatzi. So I will be moderating this meeting, but before starting, I would like just to say a few words on why the European Action Coalition has decided to organize this public event and why we believe that this study is very important. Despite the fact that our network is not limited in the EU members, but it includes collectives from all over Europe, and that we are committed to the values of internationalism and no borders, we know that the EU institutions and policies play a very important role, directly or indirectly, in the policies applied inside and outside their borders, official borders. So we know that we are all affected by these policies, despite also the fact that our network is very diverse and that among us we share different opinions on whether we should address or not the institutions and the EU in particular, and in what ways we should do that. We all agree that we need to better understand their role, especially in this context of the ever-growing housing crisis that we face all today across Europe. And we believe that this study is very important in pointing out these, and also in spite of the common belief that EU has no competencies or influence on housing and land development policies. In general, as grassroots movements, we want to understand better what is happening today in Europe and why, what turns its homes in such a hot and profitable property, and how we can tackle this problem. And I guess that part of, this study can bring part of the answer to that. And maybe in the end, just to highlight the fact that this webinar and the launch of this study comes at a particular moment in the context of the forthcoming European elections. Even though vast majority of us do not participate in the elections, either because EU seems very far away from our daily lives, or because we refuse to, or we are deprived also from our right to vote. We know also that this undemocratically elected parliament can take decisions that have a very direct impact in our daily lives. So we need to address this topic, and we need to understand better. And we believe that this study is very important for that. So thank you. And now I will leave the floor to Sophia from Rosa Luxemburg Brussels, who will introduce the study and the authors.
I was muted. So hello, I'm Sophia. I'm working at the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung in Brussels, and I'm very happy to be here today and to give a small introduction to our authors and the study itself, and also our foundation. And if you don't know it, the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung is an internationally operating non-profit organization, and we're affiliated to the left party in Germany, Die Linke. And we work on several topics ranging from feminist socio-ecological transformation, but also global social rights as housing. And that's why how we came to be here today and to commission the study. Before I start, I wanted to thank the European Coalition for the right of housing and the city for having organized it, to the authors, and also to my colleague Eniko, who could not be here, but he was the one who initiated the project here at our office. And Yeah, so thanks for everybody for being here. And I will talk, I will briefly introduce our speakers and authors. If you don't know them already, it's Eniko, who is a researcher on housing regimes and urban development in the context of capitalist transformation in several European countries, but mainly she calls it European semi-peripheries, and a political activist of the social housing now movement in Cluj in Romania. And Eva Batavatzi is an architect involved in the housing justice movement in Belgium and Greece, and also worked as a facilitator for the European Coalition for the Rights to Housing and the City. So I thank them both for being here and for having written the study that we will introduce. And we will also send a link around so that you have a direct link to download the study and read it through if you wish. So the study was commissioned about a year ago, and we thought we're working on our region, let's say, is the European Union. And so since we're working on social rights as housing, and if you think of housing, you always think, you don't forcibly think about the European Union, because housing is something that is, or the European Union, the Commission says it's a matter like the member states are involved or are deciding upon housing policies. But as we see, there are some directives coming from the Commission and some initiatives, and there are several Parliament resolutions of the European Parliament that address housing. And since also we're all living in we're part of a capitalist economic system, and the European Union is doing a lot to shape it and to regulate it, the economic system we're living in has a direct impact on social rights as housing. So it's forcibly linked together. And that's why the study, like in the first chapter of the study, it really like presents the housing crisis as it is part of a political economic context, to get a better overview of really like the whole context. And then it really addresses the European institution policies and practices, which means basically the European Commission and the Parliament and their direct actions concerning the housing crisis and urban issues. But then also in the third chapters, it talks about the indirect impact that European policies, mainly economic policies, but also social policies, have on housing. And of course, there will be also much space given to address the critical points of these legislations, because you have some, like, for example, the Parliament, we know that can give resolutions, but then, right, really to make laws, to produce this resolution into laws is always almost impossible, or never, almost never happens. But also the European Commission initiatives lack some important aspects, and so Eniko will talk about it later also on this during this webinar. And Eva will talk, or also like our study, the fifth chapter of the study, also talks about the European measure concerning urban development, or urban regeneration, as it's often called, and will draw upon issues of gentrification, touristification, and how these are tackled by European policies. And then in the 6 chapters, and also today, we will talk about how to organize a European-wide campaign to address the housing crisis. And the study draws 2 examples of the experience in Germany and in Spain. And the study concludes with a lot of important recommendations to how to change the EU-level policies and legislation to promote the right to housing in the city, to make it really inclusive, and and to traduce these initiatives into possible European law. And then like the study concludes with a call for a socio-economic union that socializes the housing sector in the European Union, and we will also talk about it today. So I would say that I leave the floor to our two speakers to tell us more.
Thank you very much, Sophia. I would like just to add that this presentation will be structured in 3 parts. So there is the first part of analysis, the second of recommendations, and the third of conclusions. And at the very end, we'll have 40 minutes of collective discussion. In the meantime, don't hesitate to put your questions or comments in the chat, and we'll bring it back to the panel. Thank you. And the floor is to Eniko.
Thank you, Stella and Sophia. We were very challenged by this call of Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung to write a study about the impact of EU policies on housing and urban development. We finished the study in November last year, so tried to be up to date with our analysis. Nevertheless, since then, especially because now we are in the doorstep of European parliamentary elections, obviously we see new and new interventions regarding how housing should be put on the political agenda. We are not talking about these recent developments, nevertheless. So, yeah, I will start the analysis part of our presentation by saying that this study is actually a political text, a tool for political education. Its analysis and recommendations are based on the conviction that there is a need for transnational organizing to imagine and realize an alternative to capitalism. As sustained that under capitalism, the housing crisis became a permanent feature of our societies, both in terms of economic growth and in periods of economic and/or real estate crisis. These ideas are in accordance with the democratic socialist perspective of Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung that urges, I quote, for a reflective confrontation with capitalism and a radical alternative to it with an internationalist focus. Quote ended. Rethinking housing politics and the housing movement's actions for change could play an important role in such a large endeavor. In section 1, as Sophia already said, the study discusses the political economic context of the housing crisis. It stresses that the state and trans-statal actors, such as the EU institutions, have a direct and indirect impact on housing. Their policies resulted in the past decades in the vanishing of public housing and in the privatization and even financialization and residualization of social housing. In what follows, I will synthesize the analysis of sections 2, 3, 4 around one question. Why is the EU a Janus-faced political construction? Or differently put, why the EU, as it exists today, cannot ensure economic policies and financial instruments that could guarantee people's access to housing as a universal right and a fundamental need. To answer this, I will highlight 2 internal tensions within the policy fabric of the European Union. The first tension consists of the asymmetric powers of the EU institutions. The European Commission is not only an executive power, but also the institution that initiates legislation. The European Parliament has a vote on EU legislation, but, for example, its own resolutions are not legally binding. Moreover, the EU has several consultative bodies and decentralized agencies whose proposals remain informal suggestions. Last but not least, the EU supports some housing federations, such as FEANZA and Housing Europe, but it does not support transnational networks militating for the regulation of the housing market or significantly increasing public investments in public housing. Let me illustrate with 2 examples the ways in which these institutional landscapes affect non-action on housing matters at the EU level. In 2016, this is the first example, through the so-called Pact of Amsterdam, the European Urban Agenda Initiative recognized housing as one of the urban priorities in Europe. The informal meeting of EU ministers responsible for urban matters elaborated and adopted this document, but they stressed that it wanted to be informal because they did not want to put so much burden on urban authorities. Therefore, even if this pact had attractive ideas about public welfare and the common good, including, among others, housing, the European Commission did not transpose this initiative into binding legislation. Additionally, the housing partnership of the EU Urban Agenda remained an informal group, so its promised focus on public affordable housing had no effect on formal policymaking within the European Union. Having all this proposal on its table, in 2020, when it decided how to use EU funds, the European Commission did not aim to increase the public housing stock, social or affordable or whatsoever. Under the so-called Renovation Way for Europe program, in 2022, the Commission launched the so-called Affordable Housing Initiative. The name of this initiative is quite confusing because it does not provide funds for the production of new energy-efficient affordable residences, but it only supports some projects to renovate existing public and social housing stock. Let us consider as a second example the European Parliament's resolutions on social housing from 2013, homelessness from 2020, and affordable housing from 2021. These resolutions recognize the severity of the housing crisis, including the increasing housing prices on the market, the growing rate of homelessness, the investment gap in social and affordable housing, and the fact that all these not only endangered social cohesion, but also affected people's trust in democracy. Nevertheless, none of these resolutions were transposed into the EU legislation, which reflects that actually the European Commission, the most powerful branch of the EU, continued to favor private capital investment into housing for profit. The second tension in the EU policy fabric that makes solving the housing crisis impossible within the EU as it exists today is the unevenness of the statuses of EU economic and social policies. I will illustrate this statement by briefly presenting how they are settled as we speak. The EU, constituted in 1993, but also its prior forms, were established as economic communities, facilitating the free movement of capital across the member states. This meant the creation of economic governance models, pacts, and institutions such as the European Single Market, the Stability of Growth Pact, the European Banking Union, the Capital Markets Union, the competition policy, and state aid rules. From this broad set of economic policies, I want to stress some of those that highly impact housing. The Stability and Growth Pact, for example, we are regulating the level of fiscal deficit and public debt, put indirect pressure on the member states to reduce public investment in public housing. Moreover, the Capital Markets Union, a new initiative of the European Commission from 2015, aimed to de-risk the investments of transnational funds across countries. So the Commission supports exactly those actors that are responsible for making house crisis even more severe than it was before. Furthermore, the European Central Bank supervises the central banks of all the EU member states, so it shapes the major trends in housing developments everywhere. Through its quantitative easing measures, the ECB contributes to the creation of housing bubbles, and via its quantitative tightening measures, as it is the case today, increases the costs of mortgages and puts indebted people at risk of losing their homes. The last example I want to mention here is how, in 2005, under the umbrella of competition policy, the European Commission imposed on the Dutch state to make its social housing allocation procedure less generalist. This action was a precedent for the 2011 European Commission decision that defined social housing as being under the regulation of the so-called services of general economic interest, which are subject to the rules of competition policy. The second example that I want to give here to illustrate the tension that makes it impossible to solve the housing crisis under capitalist economic governance refers to EU social policies. Very briefly put, we should note here that these policies are rooted in the liberal international human rights systems and exist only as soft recommendations that are not compulsory to implement by the member states. The EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, the European Convention on Human Rights, the European Social Charter, or the much acclaimed and delayed European Pillar of Social Rights are not able to have a real-life effect for two reasons. One is because even if these rights were fully implemented into legislation or even legally perfected, that are not actually, without proper economic conditions that would enable everybody to make use of their rights, they could not generate real improvements in people's lives. The second reason why these policies do not result in their assumedly positive objectives is that in this field, in the European Union, there is no serious coordination mechanism similar to how economic policies are enforced in member states via the economic governance of the European Commission. To conclude, the unfazed nature of the European Union results in a huge gap between, on the one hand, the promise of human rights-based policies or considering adequate housing as a fundamental human right, and on the other hand, the effective EU policies that dismantle the non-profit and public housing stock, which could ensure de facto access to adequate housing for all. And now I would like to give the floor to Eva.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Eniko, and thank you all for this event tonight. So I would like to speak about the part on urban development and how EU policies impact urban development. And here, I don't know, I think that things are very important to look at because, of course, it has a big influence on housing. So just a few, I will tell you just a few ideas to give you energy to go more in depth in the study. It will be very brief. And one of the things that we consider important on urban developments is that 2/3 of the EU population live in urban areas. So it means that all urban transformations or all urban non-transformations, because some neighborhoods are completely abandoned and others are completely regenerated, as they say. So all these transformations have impact almost on everyone in Europe. Also because these urban transformations, they are done with public money or EU money. And then it has an impact on the way that this public money goes into space and for whom, for which interest, in which way. So this is what we wanted to ask. Of course, in comparison with other budgets, the budget dedicated to urban development is quite limited. So it's 8% of the European Regional Development Fund, for example, and housing is not even part of it. And the budget, just to give another number that I think was quite relevant, is that the budget for social housing in the EU is only 0.66% of GDP. So it's like almost non-existent. And as Eniko mentioned, the Pact of Amsterdam, it's the only time in 2016 that housing appears as an urban priority. Other way, urban issues don't consider housing at all. So as it concerns the transformation of urban landscapes in the EU in the past years, what we could see in some of the texts of the EU on this is that the transformation of urban landscape should balance public and private interest and involve all actors, public, economic, and social. But in practice, what we see is that things don't go really that way, and that private interests are clearly above all the others, the social and public, even if the discourse is not saying it. But this is what we believe. So what we have seen and experienced is that urbanism is mainly driven by profit-seeking speculative interests, and that it serves the private real estate actors. It helps them extracting value through indirectly through these urban transformations. One of the things that make us say this is that some neighborhoods are totally transformed. There are processes of gentrification or touristification taking place and creating all the problems that we know, and other neighborhoods are totally abandoned. And somehow this transformation, because they are funded partly by EU funds, the EU has also some responsibility towards this. Also, another thing that we notice on the EU level is that these transformations that are made, even if they are financed indirectly or directly by EU funds, they create also a rise in public debt of different levels of public authorities. And this, in turn, is giving also an argument for austerity measures, which justifies a cut in housing expenditure. So in a way, urban transformation, they are conducted in an unsustainable way, even if the main discourse is that we should transform urban areas for making them more green, less polluted, etc., which of course we don't disagree with this, but the way it's run, it's very problematic nowadays. So in this study, we don't go too much in depth. We go a bit more in depth than what I'm saying, and we are trying to show about do an analysis about how urban developments and urban mobility projects and also processes of touristification that are all supported or partially funded by EU make these transformations in the benefit of private speculative interests. So what we could imagine, just briefly, and then I will stop as well, is that we should, before going into an urban regeneration project or an urban mobility project, is that we could involve all actors, and especially inhabitants, and especially create conditions for this transformation to be addressed to the local population, and evaluate the social impact, give the means to inhabitants to criticize and change urban regeneration or urban mobility project, to impose quotas of social housing, and to make price caps and measures against tax evasion. So these are for the two urban mobility and urban regeneration projects. And for the touristification, we didn't have another solution than just to restrict the market. So we really think that tourism is a sector that is really problematic, and that should be just restricted strictly. And more transparent, of course, a bigger control on short-term rental platforms, and even in some cases to stop them. So this is the analysis in general for the urban developments part. So I can go into the second part of the presentation if you want. Yes, okay. So in the second part, I just want to tell you that in our study, we went in part 7, you will find, I don't know if you opened the link that was shared to you or in the chat, but even if you didn't, I will just describe it to you. So in part 7, there is a huge work that was to resume the various recommendations to solve the housing crisis and definancialize the market. And these recommendations, they were written the past 3 years. They were written by European parliamentaries, or they were commanditated by their groups, by the left, the Greens, the Social Democrats. There was a lot of militant research. Both Fondation Abbé Pierre and FEANSA also wrote a lot. And Eurofound, the EU agency for the improvement of living and working conditions, as well as Leila Nifara and her colleagues in the Shift, who wrote as well recommendations. So what was done for part 7, it was to just give a resume of all these recommendations. And I think it was a very good way to say that voices are rising against what's happening and against the fact that financialization and commodification of housing is promoted and supported by the EU institutions and by public authorities, and that this is criticized. The housing crisis is really, so obvious that everybody wants to fight it and everybody is writing about it. So it's not about not having a clear image. The image is very, very clear. Just there is no political will to fight that problem, and even there is a political will to erase the problem. So, but these recommendations are quite interesting to have a look at. So in general, just to give a big image, is that almost all the studies say that the papers, the recommendations say that we should fight against financialization, regulate institutional landlords, ensure a home for everyone, develop EU housing strategies, draft directives for a human right-based framework, address the cost of living, prevent evictions and over-indebtedness in very general. So more precisely, some ideas that can be found, but I will not read all the chapter to you tonight, don't worry. but just I think it's very nice to have a little overview. The first point that we can see is that everybody knows that money is there. Money exists, it's there, it just had to be allocated. And there is no money allocated to social housing. So people raise their voice to say, we have to increase the EU funds for housing. We have to expand the stock of affordable housing. So this is one of the main points of these recommendations. And then where is the money? If it exists, where it is? For example, why it is not given to the housing? One of the things is that the spending on housing is considered in as a national in the national budgetary limits. So it's like an expenditure, but in fact we consider it's not an expenditure. It's an investment. So it should not be inside these limits of expenditure of the states. And also, these years of austerity have created a lot of problems. And it would be a time now to promote welfare states and to go further with real obligatory national investment for social and affordable housing, with even sanctions if you don't spend. If the states don't spend, the member states don't spend, they should be even sanctions. So these are some of the recommendations we see in these papers. It's not what we say, it's what we see in these papers. And there is also the request to facilitate access to finance. Then another family of requests, of recommendations is that there should be more regulation on EU level, regulation of actors of financialisation, regulate the financial market in general, but in particular the mortgage market, and put barriers in international speculation. Regulate institutional actors. So, for example, erase tax privilege, make them responsible of their investment, etc. And then they also speak again about Airbnb and this kind of short-term rental platforms. There is also ECB, the European Central Bank, is also targeted because it has the power to react to housing prices inflation through tighter control of mortgages lending. There could be a credit regulation to improve the EU consumer and mortgage credit directives, and so on and so on. Another family is about the definition of social housing, because social housing definition is very restrictive. It's considered to be for the most precarious. So one of the examples you gave before, Eniko, was of Holland. The social housing could be a general of general interest and not be so restrictive. We have to redefine what is social housing, and also we denounce in a way the definitions of social housing. And many voices rise to say that human rights-based housing politics have to replace market-based housing policies. And of course, a little more political will and more political will, because there is no, this is against homelessness, against exclusion, against discrimination, evictions, and so on. So then in chapter 7, you will also find the European Parliament resolutions that have different calls for social housing, to end homelessness, and for affordable housing. And just, I will not speak too much more. Sorry, I don't know if too long. No, it's okay. Okay. So What is very nice about this is that we see that the European the members of the European Parliament and other institutions, NGOs and militants are completely aware of the problem. This is what I was saying in the beginning. And there is no real lack of info. There is some, I mean, we don't have the info on who owns the cities, how much power the institutional actors have, and how the transactions are going, and etc. But in general, the image is pretty clear. So it's what it shows is that the political will is missing. And then in the part 7.3, you will find in the study so it's called Arguments Learned from the European Commission's Renovation Wave. And here I want to say that big congratulations to my colleague Eniko, because she did a very nice job for this part, I have to say. Because she imagined, propose a kind of game and replaced the word renovation wave by public social housing wave, which I think was a brilliant idea. And so she uses the arguments of the European Commission for the renovation wave, and just with the replacement of this word from renovation to public social housing, it completely transformed the image. And it's very clear that, again, that the political will is lacking. So there are some critics about the recommendations I just listed before. They are not very radical. They could be more radical. There is a thing about not wanting to address really the public social housing issue. So social housing is not so much inside these recommendations. And we believe that public social housing is the top one priority. And we also want a socialized housing sector. So in general, in the study that we wrote, we can say that there are some parts missing about the recommendations, like we couldn't go in depth with the cost of living crisis, with the houses for migrants, refugees, and undocumented persons. We couldn't go in depth in the general economic crisis and how it impacts the housing crisis. So there are more to read in other papers that other people write, of course. But what for sure we want to say that is that we want public social housing, and the resources exist. We have vacant buildings. We have buildings that need to be expropriated. We have to build where it's needed, so we need financial resources for that. We can liberate finance and democratize it. We can tax profits and limit speculation. We can control prices. We can abolish illegitimate debts and socialize resources, democratize governments, etc., etc. And weaken the elite also is another idea that I didn't say. So I will finish there for the presentation of these parts 7 and 8, and I will let the floor now again to Eniko.
Yes, thank you, Eva. So actually, yes, our idea was to reconstruct the existing recommendations and pinpoint some of their limits and also their internal contradictions. And then proposing something else. Wouldn't say complementary, I would say a change focusing on reforming the European Union. But before presenting some details about this central proposal of ours, I also wanted to add that there are a lot of conceptual confusions in all these recommendations, depending on who is coming from where in terms of geography and geopolitical positions, because the countries, even the member states of the EU, are very different in terms of their housing regime histories. So the solutions wouldn't be one fitting all, but should be adopted to how capitalism changed the now historical housing regimes, both in Western Europe and Eastern Europe. We see a huge gap between Eastern Europe and Western and Northern Europe in the sense that we can see that after dismantling state socialism in Central and Eastern European countries, the percentage of social and public housing decreased a lot, below 2% or something, going to zero. However, in Western countries, there is still a consistent percentage of social and public housing. And here another issue that we need to consider when we are thinking about changing policies, about the historical and also economic meanings of these terms, public housing and social housing, right? Because in Western Europe, there are a lot of social housing units in the ownership of private associations, non-profit private associations, which are very concerned of keeping their ownership on this social housing stock. So therefore, we do not wonder when the Housing Europe Federation, which is actually a federation of such private associations providing social housing, do make lobby and advocacy for creating opportunities for the private development of social housing. For many of us in Eastern Europe, where we don't have this legacy of private social housing means public housing, simple as that. So actually, we have the legacy of state socialist housing regime, which we consider that it had many dimensions that functioned well. Actually, the whole non-profit socialist financial system facilitated the production of mass public housing. So therefore, we are very close to, to imagine an alternative to contemporary capitalism, which would focus on the production of public housing in this sense. And beyond that, obviously, the restructuring of the whole financial system. As Eva said, we see there is a lot of money, there is a lot of capital, including public and private, circulating here and there, but it's not invested in a way which responds to people's housing needs. So actually, yeah, our conclusion would be that in the reformed European Union, new financial instruments and policies are also needed. So we don't claim better social policies, we claim different economic policies, which actually would create the possibility to produce that kind of non-profit, including public housing, which could in a significant mass could actually solve many of the housing crises that we live nowadays. So it could have an indirect impact on the prices on the housing market too. Okay, so maybe we can switch to conclusions as Stella shared two of our slides. If we go to the next slide, there we see how we defined the wanted change comparative to the problems that exist. And since the problem is that the EU is a Janus-faced capitalist economic union, and the existing policy proposals, as Eva said, for the decommodification and definancialization of housing left untouched the nature and dynamics of EU institutions, our proposal recommendation is to recreate the EU as a socio-economic union informed by the principles of democratic socialism. What means this in more concrete terms? I mean, this change would mean the extracting a significant percentage of homes from the market, and for this could be fulfilled through several procedures. For example, by the expropriation of big landlords, expropriation of private developers, by which the increase of public housing stock could be possible. So it's not about only new constructions, but it's about ways in which private housing development is put into the service of public interests. Then we say that it's important that this significant public housing stock that we would like to see accomplished by this new EU as a socio-economic union needs to be more democratic than it was, for example, during state socialism. More democratic, meaning that it could be, so this housing stock could be socialized in the sense of being administered by a local public institution controlled by the tenants themselves. So decisions about this stock should involve the tenants, and most importantly, it should be forbidden the selling of this public housing stock. Thirdly, it would be important through financial legislation and new financial instruments of this new socio-economic union that we should dare to imagine, to financialize finance as well, and to create non-profit financial systems which could support the production of public housing. So what this financial democratization very briefly would mean, it would mean that existing money would be used there where it is needed. So would be not decided, the use of the money would not be decided by a property class, by a profit-making class, but the investment of this money should be decided of labor classes, of those whose work sustain our societies, both in productive and reproductive sense. So maybe we go further to the next slide. And then maybe, Eva, you want to say this?
Yeah, so before, when we were preparing this presentation with Eniko, I was telling her I like at the end when they just give me 2 or 3 ideas, because during a webinar, I cannot concentrate so well as during a physical meeting, you know. So I suggested we both do that, and that's what we are presenting now. So here, yes. So here are my conclusions. So the money spent on public social housing aims at creating common good and wealth to benefit society instead of individualistic profit. So this is why it is an investment rather than an expenditure. This is one of the main things we have to stop saying, that housing is an expenditure. Then one other thing I wanted to stress out is that we have to socialize housing, but we also have to socialize the banking system together. So both they have to be socialized together. because they function together, and they have to be in the control of the people and not of the elites. And as Eniko just said, that finance should be democratized. At the beginning, I have to admit, I didn't understand how finance could be democratized, but then when Eniko explained, I understood a bit better. So I hope you did as well before. And then, yes, I wanted to remind that the EU institutions, they have a lot of money and a lot of power. And actually, even if we don't want to address them, or I don't know, even if we do not want to deal with them, they are influencing our lives. So for me, it was important to write this paper with Eniko, because I think it's one of the issues that we should consider very seriously, and also because the means are there to create a huge public housing stock now, and I put the now in capital and with an exclamation point to make a reference to the social housing now in Cluj, comrades. And that was a little internet joke. Sorry for people who don't know social housing now, but I hope now you will know them. So that's it for us. And we are really happy that we have some time left, I guess, for questions and discussion.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation and for this very important work. And yeah, now the floor is to everybody that would like to ask questions or even make some comments, and yeah, or even bring examples of campaigns or struggles or yeah, whatever. Feel free. Yes, Alkis.
Hello, everybody. Eniko and Eva, thank you so much for the work, the thoughts, a lot of information. I can tell you some things I didn't really know, so I will need to check them again. Some things I already knew, but I would like to see them more clearly applied in the European context. Anyway, from people that don't know me, I'm from Greece. So kind of two questions. Eva, you finished with talking about European institutions have money and people can use them, or we could push for those changes, while Eniko at the beginning, at least as I understood it, said that especially the European Commission that has the executive power is really geared towards market-oriented solutions, obviously. So those money go towards that direction. And we have the elections now. And the question is, how do we change those institutions to give us those monies, apart from the parliament elections that we have that apparently are not changing anything? So could you kind of like suggest anything in that direction? It would be helpful, maybe. A difficult question, I know, but it will be interesting to see your thoughts on that topic. Is it only about electing representatives, or could we have a more, how can I say it, constructive idea of what kind of European institutions we need in the end? And one thing that I would like to mention is, while Eniko was describing the differences between West and East housing, how did you say, in housing systems, Greece is kind of like in between or something totally different, and it's even more diverse than that. In Greece, public housing has never existed in a way, so people would not really understand what that means. It would be publicly owned, would be publicly managed. It has many different connotations for people in Greece, and it's a more kind of diverse system. It's not West versus East. There are other countries that have another kind of housing system with smaller owners that we need to be able to approach while having these discussions. It's not a question, or maybe it's a question if it feels like a question. Thank you for your time. Greetings from Greece, and looking forward for more.
Maybe we should take 2 or 3 questions and after go on with the answer. So, George.
Thank you for your presentations, Eniko and Eva. I wanted to ask if you can tell us more about how EU institutions reacted or react to these recommendations made by the organizations that you mentioned, Eva. In a way, we know how that they don't really take it into account, but it would be interesting to learn more about how they argue that it's not possible or anything like that, because it's useful in future organizing. Thank you.
I don't see any other hands raised, so yeah, maybe you can go on with the answers.
Yeah, thank you, Arkis. I would start with your questions. I'm afraid that we are not able to define more concrete ideas about how this change could be induced in European institutions. Actually, it's obviously it's not only the elections that are happening nowadays. Wars are happening. Geopolitical conflicts are happening. The world is falling apart, and all these issues obviously will matter more in people's decision of going or not going to elections, or whom to elect instead of whom. So unfortunately, as always, there is something more challenging to respond to than just to the housing matters. So actually, they were never good times, I guess, to speak about the housing crisis, especially because this is something that exists during all the periods, as I said, both during economic growth periods when everybody is happy, that development is going on, which actually means that housing prices are increasing, the real estate investors, developers are very happy, and while people are suffering from these increasing housing prices. Yeah, I guess even if they are nowadays, I saw since January some new initiatives coming from Housing Europe Federation, for example, and from the Belgian presidency of EU Council, that suggest to put housing on the political agenda. But actually, who will put it, how and when, I'm sure that they don't know, and we cannot know either. So all what we can do, I guess, public intellectuals and political activists, is to prepare our political mindset for a possible change, or to nurture this, this political imagination that an alternative is possible. And when the alternative will occur due to other political and social circumstances, then it would be good, to have these lessons learned from these studies, or from this understanding of these preparations for future housing policies. But again, this to happen, or our proposal about democratic socialism and how that should change the EU into a socio-economic union, are actually obviously do not have any chance of success if the democratic socialist parties will not gain majority in the European Parliament and in the European Commission. We will see how things will happen. Unfortunately, for now, the far-right parties are much more prepared to take up the housing question and to capitalize on this. Yeah, this is again, I guess, a concern which makes many politicians to promise nowadays, I will take care of housing if I'm going to be elected. But how, when, and under what circumstances, nobody actually says. And yeah, and I guess what you also said about the large diversity of the housing regimes, indeed, sorry, yes, I made a very simple dichotomy between Western and Eastern European paradigms, but actually, yeah, we have Southern Europe, it's not only Greece, it's also Spain and Portugal, that countries which never had actually a public housing stock, and people, yeah, and the solutions to people's lack of adequate housing, inaffordability of housing, should be solved by different means. And I guess it's very, yeah, it's very difficult to create political solidarity around this issue, because we have these small property owners that you Alki said. We also have them in Romania and other countries, but also in Western Europe, right? So not the big institutional investors, landlords, but the small property owners who wouldn't be interested in big change, because they also, I don't know, they buy and sell and rent their apartments. So housing became a part of wealth, people's wealth, and it's very difficult indeed to interrupt this process. Nevertheless, the new generations, the youngsters, I guess this can be generally said in all the countries. For sure, they don't have properties, or many of them don't have properties. They are enforced into the private rental market. They could be the generation who could fight for proper housing arrangements. And we consider that public housing is the proper one, but well, yes, this is what we say, and this diagnosis should be obviously politically and economically nuanced in different country contexts.
Okay, I would like to also answer the three questions. So about how we could push for those changes in the European Commission, I think for us, of course, we are both part of the European Action Coalition for the Right to Housing and to the City. And I mean, it's really not a surprise that we think that grassroots movements should collaborate in Europe and have transnational, translocal forces, activist forces that can grow in power in the next years, hopefully, and address these issues in general, not go to address the EU institutions. This is not our point, but create common actions, create a common force on the ground, doing translocal actions like the Housing Action Day, like the actions against the MIPIM, the real estate fair in Cannes. I mean, these are the kind of things that we believe we have to continue doing, and to show that there is also grassroots groups that organize on a European level, but more largely than the EU, a vast European territory, including UK, Serbia, and other countries. So this is one thing that we cannot push change just by raising awareness, writing papers, and addressing politics. No, we have to be on the street. This is clear. And of course, all that Eniko said before, but I just wanted to put that in addition to what you said. I don't think that we could change these institutions. I think we have to imagine a different union, a completely different union. So this is why there is this idea of a socio-economic union that is not based on freedom of movement of capital and to promote financialisation processes and all this, but clearly to show that there is a possibility to collaborate on a translocal and transnational level in the European continent with social goals, clearly. So for Greece, because I also live in Greece, so we are not far from each other, I want to say that for me, one of the things, because I have thought about your question a lot in my life, and I was thinking, how can we address people who live here and have no real history of public housing? How can we address small owners, etc.? So one of the answers I had from my question, because I asked it also to other people, it came from Poland, from a comrade there, and he told me, what we say to people who organize with us is that you will never become an owner again, that ownership is dead, access to ownership is dead. It's a very extreme way of putting things, but what it means is that the private rental sector is most probably for the younger generation, the vast majority of younger generation is the perspective of housing they will have, and there is a need to understand that and to go beyond the idea of small ownership. But also another element that came to my mind while asking myself this question, it was, but what is the difference if you are an owner or a tenant when speculation is forbidden? So you cannot sell your house, you cannot really rent it or at least not at high price. And if you are a tenant and speculation is forbidden, most probably the housing prices will not be what they are today. And so I was thinking to myself that maybe this dichotomy that society created between capitalistic neoliberal society created between homeowners and tenants actually is something that makes us a bit apart. And also, when I was in Barcelona a few days ago for a big meeting of tenants union, I realized that there was also Greek people there, and they were saying, yeah, but how to organize maybe inhabitants, and put the notion a bit further. So I don't know. I think that of course we have to adapt to each context, like Eniko said, but public social housing doesn't mean it's only addressed to tenants. Public social housing can mean a lot of things, and we have to see what it means and how it can be applied in the different contexts. And then about what George said, how the institutions, the EU institutions reacted to this recommendation. I have to admit, I don't know. And maybe, Eniko, you know better than me, because I have no idea.
I could say simply that I don't know either, but my impression is that there was no reaction, because in a way there is no dialogue between these spaces where knowledge is produced and political decisions are taken. So somehow the EU functions through these parallel worlds, which have a structural reason to exist, which is what? Which is to pretend that the idea that the European Union is both or covers a society of free market is also true, that the European Union has advanced social models. So this is the self-definition of the EU, no? So a mixed economy which allows the functioning both of the free market and implements social models, including in housing. So this is the ideal. And somehow this very fragmented institutional landscape of the EU fulfills this ideal. But we have the European Commission that takes the economic decisions, which are compulsory and which support capital in its investments. And we have the rest of the institutions, including the European Parliament, but also these advisory bodies and, I don't know, dozens of different committees which do their work, spend the EU money, make analysis reports, make expensive lunches, workshops, and nothing happens. And everybody is pleased that everybody did what it was supposed to do. So the commissioners take their serious economic decisions, and the rest is speaking about this, I don't know, idealistic or too much optimistic, or even naive, because probably they are considered naive matters like public social housing, right? Because yeah, those who are doing hard economic politics, they sustain that those who are speaking about socioeconomic rights and housing as a social matter don't really realize that for all this you need money. And if money comes from private investors, then private investors should be allowed to freely invest wherever they want and to increase the prices however they want, to speculate, to whatever they do in their business strategies. So I guess, yeah, so it's this non-communication between these two spheres, I guess. So therefore, our proposal challenges people to think about a socio-economic union, which creates a much more integrated, coherent system in terms of economic policies and social policies. And housing is a very specific example for this, right? Because it's also an economic and a social matter. So it's a very good terrain to think about how these two seemingly contradictory dimensions could be brought together, and yeah, so how the investment of money could support people's housing needs and not the needs of the investors to make profit. So that is the question, but it's not discussed because, yeah, they are in these parallel worlds of separate interests and ways of thinking. Yeah.
Mauro.
Hi everyone. Thanks. I joined a bit later, so I maybe missed the larger part of the lecture, but I'll check the recording. But I wanted to add maybe to the discussion this necessity to deal with this the primary let's say rights to ownership, which in Croatia was pushed in the 90s after dissolving of socialist Yugoslavia, and was pushed in front of the right to housing, which was kind of abandoned in the 90s with this neoliberal nation state foundation. And it would be interesting to discuss maybe in also addressing on the EU level how we want to address this, to push for the right to housing, which should be above the ownership status, and maybe to discuss how different legal frameworks are defining this and what are different ways on dealing with this. Because at the moment we have, let's say, when we want to protect tenants' rights in Croatia, usually always the capitalists are the homeowners are have easier access to court and usually win the cases against tenants. So there is always this bigger juridical force on the homeowners. So how to address this on the constitutional level, and this is something we're trying to address here as well, to put at least to start addressing in the mainstream discourse the constitutional right to housing. And maybe another issue to discuss, I think you addressed in the research, is the financial institutions. So also there are different European financial institutions. I think you addressed mostly the European Central Bank and European Investment Bank. And from our experience, we started having some contacts with the Council of Europe Bank, which also funds public social housing projects. And then we have bad experience with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which kind of aims to promote capitalist investments in the private rental sector. And it's very active in the post-socialist states to push for large capitalist ventures into rental sector in these countries. And there is a big let's say pressure on, let's say, cities to invest in their brownfields and bring large foreign investors and pension funds. So, and there is this, we found there is this specific NGO from Brussels named Bankwatch, which is kind of organized to supervise this EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So kind of, it would be interesting to discuss this, not necessarily now, but maybe also in Split when we're going to discuss maybe this results of this research. All these different institutions and which are kind of on a good side and bad side, and which promote actually social policy and which are actually capitalist interests. And maybe third comment regards the need for organizing. I was not part of Right to the City back then, but Antonia and other colleagues, I think, were, when in 2019 there was a citizen initiative, Housing for All, which was supposed to collect, I think, 1 million signatures, which is kind of European tool in the European policy. When 1 million signatures are collected in the EU, then becomes a proposal, I think, in the parliament or something like that. So I think maybe using again this kind of tool. Back then it was not collected in time, 1 million signatures, but maybe think about also this kind of organizing to see if this kind of actions would be also favorable to put the issues of housing on the European level.
Thank you. Would you like to react, Eniko or Eva?
Yes, I can start, and maybe Eniko, I don't know if you want to also react after. Okay, so about the, okay, I can answer the third question better than the other ones, but anyway, about the constitutional rights, I think there is a demand, a general demand, that the European institutions could be addressed to force member states to apply some politics, to make some changes, to spend some money. You know, there is this tendency to ask more power to the EU if they want to impose a social agenda. Because they have a lot of power to create changes in the economies of countries, of member states, but they always use the argument that we don't want to intervene in the judicial systems or in the legislative systems of the member states, like and not in the constitution. So there is this ambivalence that for me, I'm not sure. I haven't thought about what is the best way to deal with this. But of course, with the EU we have today, I would not trust them to have more power. But if we could have a different union, maybe we could see what is the possibilities about this. One thing I know is that there is a tool that is the Commission of Petition, where people can go, or even NGOs or groups of people or anybody, to address the European Parliament for an issue. And now there are a lot of fights against metro stations in Europe, for example, against the metro in Exarchia Square here in Athens, or the metro in Madrid, or as I heard, the metro in Lisbon or in Cluj, and even in Brussels. And in the case of Madrid and maybe more, but these are the only 6 I know for the moment. And in the case of Exarchia metro station and Madrid, so they are wannabe metro stations with EU funds. They are planning to implement metro station there. And inhabitants are very angry and don't want that, because they are not at all, these projects are not decided in a democratic way. So they addressed both from Madrid and Athens, the militants against this project addressed the European Parliament through the Committee of Petitions. And these 2 petitions were accepted. So it means that they have to be studied, and the European Commission must make an effort to see what's happening. So there is some little tools that, if you don't have a mediatic coverage, and if you don't have a big and strong how to say, inhabitants that want to fight for it, social basis. So then it might be that your petition goes to not be heard, but you know, who knows? So there are some tools like this one who can be used. And for the Housing for All campaign in 2019, I personally heard about it, and also the way it was proposed was a bit strange to me. So I don't know how much I would support this type of initiatives, but and I don't know which impacts they would have. Yes, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I could see this as a solution, as a transnational petition in this way. I don't know. But also personally, and this is very personal, I'm more in need that, in the position to say that I would like to, the problems and the critics, they are very visible. We visualize them, we write about them, we make this kind of webinars, we go in the streets to fight against them. So I don't think that I don't think that we need something like this. I think that the politicians, they are very aware of the problem, and again there is a lack of will. So I'm not sure this kind of petitions could work. But in the case of the European Parliament, as I said, I think there it can be a little fight between two powers that may delay or cancel or redesign a project that is EU funded. And for the other banks, so I don't know all the banks of the European Union, I have to admit. But what I know is that for me, the European Central Bank has the most powerful effect on economies. So in the case of Greece, for example, between I think 2019, 2020, and 21, so during these 3 years, they have pushed so much the Greek banks to sell off their non-performing loans, which resulted in auctions and evictions of people, that today, the last year, 2023, there were 50,000 people in the country who were threatened of auction and eviction because of this. So what I know about the banks is this, is that the European Central Bank, for me, has had the more visible and clear effect on housing justice in Europe. The European Investment Bank, for me, it's something that promotes investment. That's what I know about it, but I'm not an expert of the European Investment Bank. And it creates tools that help. So it has so much indirect effect. So it's not exactly that they loan you money. They make some facilities, like they play on the interest rates, or they give debt guarantees, or this is the kind of help that I'm not sure they had an impact. We had a discussion on this about Ireland, I remember, but with a comrade, John Bissett, but it didn't seem to say that they had a big effect. And for the rest, maybe Eniko, you have more things to say about all this.
I don't know how much time do we have. We need to close soon, I guess.
Yes, I would say in 5 to 7 minutes we need to close, but yeah. It's a good
Mauro, thank you for your questions. You raised so much dilemmas. We did not address the issue of different banks and other financial institutions, investment funds, etc., because the study was about the policies and not about what capital is doing and how financial institutions are facilitating these capital investments. But yeah, this would be a good topic to think about further. So how the European-based banks actually, besides the European Central Bank, are actually part of this architecture, institutional architecture that creates more investment opportunities for private capital and real estate and financial capital. And then the issue of home ownership, yes, that's a political construction. And it was not only us, the Central and East European countries, which were targeted with this idea of nurturing home ownership. but it was a larger, a more global trend to politically promote home ownership as one and only path to have a decent home. And actually that political creation supported the investors, developers who started to invest into housing, right? However, investors prefer home rental, private rental. They appear, especially in those countries which have a bigger, a more developed, advanced private rental market. And we from Central and Eastern Europe are less developed yet. Poland is more developed than Romania. Maybe Romania is more developed than, I don't know. I don't want to make these hierarchies. And anyway, I also wanted to say, and how this whole institutional architecture basically is it's not only that it's dominating the whole political decision-making and subordinates political decision-making to the economic interests of owner classes and developers and investors, but it's also that they are very innovative, very creative. They always invent novel ways to create opportunities for investment. For example, and which we also need to study at a point, this EU taxonomy rules, social taxonomy, green taxonomy, which are kind of classificatory systems, if I understood well, which say which are the so-called sustainable economic activities into which the capital should be invested. So the policies are actually assuming to direct capital into investment into this so-called sustainable activities. So therefore, the Green New Deal is actually a great new investment opportunity for the capital, right? And all the EU policies on this domain are actually creating, de-risking these investments. Social taxonomy is something similar. I'm not sure that it was decided or it's already implemented, but I know that there was since 2021 or something this aim to do similar thing in the social domain, social sectors, including social housing. So it can happen, and it already happens actually, that social housing becomes a target of investors. And policies create the opportunities for this, right? So if the European Union will remain as it is today, we will see in a few months or whatever that social housing became a favored sector for private investors. And EU policies and banks will support actually this trend. Capital could be invested in there. It's an investment without risks. And and again, this idea that private investor will solve all our issues will be reinforced, right? If the EU is to be changed, this shouldn't happen actually. I mean, all the money that is there and is circulating actually, the question is why it should not be invested by the state directly, why it should be given to investors, developers in different forms, like state aid or subventions or other forms, to create something that the state actually could create and create a more secure and long-standing public housing stock without these private actors. And the story somehow repeats the old story, I guess, no? When some states sold their housing stocks to private companies, which promised that for 10 years will not change the price of rents. the cost of rents, right? And after 10 years, they changed it. So all the public money that was invested into creation of these public housing stock sold to private associations actually entered into the capital investment cycles of private investors, and public investments ended up supporting the housing market, which is something that we don't agree with. At least we can condemn it, as Eva used to say. Even if we cannot change it, we can say this is not right. This is bullshit. This is not just, not fair, not economically, socially sustainable. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to just make a comment, which is not, I mean, not very long, but I just wanted to share that I found this study super interesting and very important. And besides the fact that is addressing all these issues related to the European Union, is putting this question of public social housing at the center of the answers. And I think that this is super important. And I also have the feeling that either in the East or in the West, I live in France, for example, public social housing, it has been completely discredited as a model. Not only privatized, but really not at all seen, I believe, even from the movement as a model. And I believe, I have the feeling that there is not so much, we don't speak enough about the solution of the public social housing. Also in different conferences or gatherings, models that are most promoted today are cooperatives, for example, which could be solutions, but social and private and public housing is not so much defended. So I think that it's a very good point also for us as collectives to speak more about it and to defend it. Yeah. If nobody else has anything to add, we can close this webinar and thank again everybody for participating. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.